I don't remember doubting it for a minute. We'd been working on this project for so long, and everything else we'd worked on had gone so well, that when he said, no, this is what we're doing, let's do it, it was like, okay, here we go, let's do it. And it was a big adventure. And like he said, you know, look, if it all goes wrong, if it all goes to hell in a handbasket, will we be able to get jobs? Of course we will.
There was a lot more of a potential to pull the show off financially as a model in Canada than it was in the US. US, we never would have gotten.
In England was worse.
Even worse.
So yeah, it was like we're doing it in Vancouver. And that was when we quit our jobs.
Gab and I went into the producer's, the main producer's office. We handed in our resignation letters. I got marched out the door straight away. Gab got marched upstairs for another few months to finish the jobs that were going on.
And that was when Phil flew to LA to do the prep work with Ian in LA, Ian and Kelly in LA. And I, you know, had a couple of months with the missus just to smooth over the transition. And then they drove up. Ian, Kelly already had a place in Vancouver. Ian and Phil drove up the PCH.
We had one tape. I had one cassette. It was Frank Black's first solo album. Frank Black used to be in the Pixies. During our drive, that's the only tape we played. It had no oxide left on it by the end of it, but we knew every single song. We'd sing every single song in the drive up Pacific Coast Highway, then across to I-5. That's a super fun memory. That was a super fun journey, and to be able to share that with him was wonderful.
We timed it so that I landed the day after they arrived. And that was it. We were in Vancouver, and it was a beautiful summer's day. We stayed at the Granville Island Hotel for the first couple of weeks.
And let's just say we're a little skint. So that's how we ended up at the hotel. They gave us a cheap deal.
It was great because we were at the Granville Island Hotel with one of the best views in Vancouver. And we had to draw all the blinds because we're sitting working at computers, building models. I don't think it was ever meant to be for very long. But once once an animator gets sat at a terminal building a model, they can't be bothered. It's like, I don't want to move, I'm doing this.
I got a tour of the office being hotel rooms, and they're rendering, with the, corporate safe curtains, and this is $750,000 of workstations on these, hotel tables.
So we had 4 SGIs in there set up and working, and a Mac workstation where Kelly was planning all the layouts of the wiring of the company and all this kind of stuff. The first episode, which was second episode broadcast, famously, which was a deliberate thing, was Racing the Clock, and it took 9 months to make. Because we had to build everything to start with. We had to build a city, we had to build all the characters. We had to make all the characters move and talk and walk. We had to build a city, and we had to build a city that was usable. So that's why we built it in pie sections, so you could load in the section you wanted. We had to build a primitive version of it and a detailed version of it, so you'd swap them out before you rendered. And then there were set pieces where you'd go in close, like the diner, and the area around the diner was a more detailed model that could be just grafted in while you were working.
We could have characters, but if they didn't have anywhere to play, then, we weren't going anywhere. I think Ian was working on Dot's Diner. Principal's office was an important location to get done. Lost Angles came a little bit later because that was stranger, so there weren't many straight lines involved in it, so it took a bit more design work. I think we just worked on what we could to get through and towards the projected first episode. So as something became necessary to create, somebody would take it on.
Yeah, Phil was building Frisket, and I was building Hack and Slash, and Ian was building Megabyte, I think.
Usually when I get brought on a show like this, there's like a data dump of here's where we've been, everything, including the stuff that we know we don't like, stuff we know we like, and where we're at today. I think there was 5 scripts in various states or outlines. So I read the development, and where we were at when I came on was that Megabyte was a virus. And so in true virus fashion, all the people that were under him didn't know he was a virus. So they thought he was just another citizen, but he was the governor. Bob and Dot, it was kind of it was more of they were hanging out with them. And that really I didn't like it. I just think it would be cooler if it was just Darth Vader, you know, just like, he's bad, he's over there, oh, you have to go to, if he shows up, I don't know, I just feel like it's more mythical. Another thing that kind of bugged me was at Dot was, it was more like she was a single owner of a single business.
Mainframe's best bite is at the Chip and Sip Diner, where you'll find Dot.
But I thought it would be cooler if she was like this sort of mysterious entrepreneur that was just like, nobody knew how much stuff she was into.
Al and I are partners in his business. I just vid-windowed for a delivery.
You and Al? So much for me being Mr. Save the Day.
But most of the development I thought was solid. I thought the core friendships were good. I sort of made some suggestions, but I only made suggestions after I sat down with the hub, find out what their hopes and dreams were, sat down with the producers, at the time was Limelight, you know, the studio, and then obviously ABC had real clear things. Being hired as a story editor is kind of the idea of like, you're kind of traffic copying in between all of that.
First was Limelight, that the guys came to as the hub, and Steve Barron was one of the partners of the company. Then there's Hit. Henson was the Rolls-Royce of foreign distribution of like kid shows. I mean, when they had the Muppets, for God's sake, it was Henson. Hit syndicated it the first year, and they did a brilliant job. I mean, they got us on NHK Japan. They got us on networks you just couldn't get on. You're gonna need a Canadian distributor to kick off your CanCon, hence Alliance.
Alliance was not initially involved with the creation and production of ReBoot, other than initially as a kind of a financier. As it turned out, making groundbreaking computer animation is not an easy thing, certainly creatively, but also financially and technically.
To get Canadian tax credit, you needed a partner that was a Canadian broadcaster. The primary sales went to both YTV Canada and ABC. So then we have YTV as the selected broadcaster from Canada that would basically commission the show as a Canadian show.
YTV launched in September of '88 and I joined '89. I think there were about 35 employees and no ratings. When I inherited programming, it was pretty much dead last in the universe as it relates to Canadian specialty. The top show had one show, Little House on the Prairie, 100,000 viewers, 2+. Everything else. By the time I left, we had 110 shows at 100,000, 2+, and we had handfuls that were 4, 5, 550, 600,000, 2+. I had the hammer and the checkbook, full stop. If I saw something, then bing, yeah, we'll do 26 of those. I'll give you 65,000. Can you have it here next January? And that's the way I worked. I didn't screen shows. I didn't watch shows. I didn't read scripts. I was hunting. Every day I was hungry for stuff to put in the machine that was going to work for the kids and the family. I wasn't going to sit down for a long time and micromanage each and every script and nuance. That it was just show me a picture, bang, that'll work. Good, thanks, see you later. We just found good stuff, and well, ReBoot was one of them. Like, that was the pièce de résistance. That was the platinum play. That was just like, can't get better than that.
And I've done enough shows, it's like, you know when you're on a show if it's gonna be a dog, and just a lot of smoke. And then you're on other shows, you're like, ooh, we almost had it. Yeah, and it seems like you need like 5 or 6 people in key spots that are just insanely obsessed about doing good work, and they're just talented and they're passionate. If you have those 5, 6 people, then you get that escape velocity, and then the smoke turns to fire and the show goes. And on this show, we had like 15 of those people.
You know, my world was drawing props and weapons and cars, robots. I did that a lot. And then one of my teachers said, he came up to me, he says, there's a job from one of my friends in Vancouver. There's a production that needs cars to be built, to be drawn. I had faxed over drawings. They weren't just static cars. They were jumping, losing wheels, and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I got the job, and then a week later I was in Vancouver. Productions only last for a certain amount of time. I was seeing that there was no more work, so I was gonna leave. And then production design for ReBoot came up, and that's where I started to draw Bob's car and some buildings and all sorts of things. I was going crazy because I knew it was computers, so I was putting in a whole lot of detail. I went and put everything possible under the hood. So this drawing, I probably did this one at Studio B, and this was my first drawing for Hex's lair. This was like really with Ian. Ian was saying, no, it's got to be more crooked and crazy, and he's a tower. So that was the next iteration for it. And this is all the course of like 1 or 2 days. Like I was drawing like crazy. This was really quick. And then this is getting closer to what it is now, or what they ended up with. But he says, nothing angular, let's make it organic. You can see it's showing it's 30 years. When that job ended, I went on to a different 2 more productions. And when that was done, it was like, I really like that ReBoot stuff. I really want to work there.
Our first place where we were working was the Granville Island Hotel, and we were there for a couple of weeks, and then we moved to the Coast Plaza Hotel. The working suite at the Coast Plaza was 3 months, but by then we were only renting the suite to do the work in. We were using it as an office because we all had places to live by then, with our IKEA furniture and our IKEA starter packs. I think we went up to like 6 machines, and we'd employed a couple of other guys by then. Big Andy, I think, was one of them. Jimmy Haywood was another.
There was Ian and Gavin and Phil and their buddy Kelly Daniels, but I was the first person, like the first animator hired when we were in a hotel room, yeah. But yeah, I think I met those guys when I was about 20 years old. It's like, Mom, I met these 3 men from England and I'm gonna go work in a hotel room with them for the next year. I knew a little bit because I had a small studio called Digital Alchemy here in Vancouver. So I was doing commercials with this guy, Doug Parker, who also did tons of voice work in Vancouver. And he introduced me to Ian, and we became pals immediately. Ian offered me to come and work on it. And I was like, yeah, of course I want to do that. And I had to break it to my partners that I was leaving. And then right after that, about a few months into it, I invited Andrew Doucette to join me, and he jumped over. So he was like the second guy.
I kind of got eager, and I was like, I want in on that. So I eventually had a interview with them at the hotel downtown, which, funny enough, I was working part-time at the moment. And on my lunch break, went up and interviewed with them. Went really well. And they told me shortly after I was hired. So I went down to my locker, changed into my uniform, went to my boss and gave my notice, and then went upstairs into the suite and started working. And funny enough, had my boss at the hotel come up and bring me my lunch sandwich from room service, which was kind of weird.
So Andrew Doucette and I worked together for the next couple of years on the show. Immediately, they gave me a bunch of soft image manuals, and like a few days later, I was working in the hotel with them, and then I was working around the clock 7 days a week for the next couple of years, just spending every waking minute with those people.
That's where I think the first thing I ever did for ReBoot was build Hexadecimal's lair. I think that was my first assignment.
Like the first character I modeled was Fong. And I remember looking at all his designs for that being like, this is like E.T., but like Metropolis, like Karate Kid.
I believe Gavin was working on Dot.
I had pictures of people like Kira Nerys from Deep Space Nine taped to my monitor while I was building her, because she's a kick-ass female character.
Was modeling hexadecimal, so a lot of everybody was basically picking up a character, building that, having to build all the sets and environments while we're waiting for the studio.
Big Andy, Jimmy, coming in from Digital Alchemy, have been working on commercials, but they not worked on the longer form stuff that we were. Nobody worked on longer stuff that we were doing. But there were folks who came in at a much lower level. They needed to go through and be trained. And I was one of the few people in the office who had experience to be able to teach. So I'd always done that, like right from day one.
I'd interview the kids and I'd look at their portfolios, because these were kids 19, 20 years. I mean, the average age of mainframe employees were probably 22. You know, also I said, are you a gamer? Because they had to have a feel for, you know, computers. If they related to that, then I thought they were a pretty good candidate to teach how to be a computer animator.
We'd put adverts in the trade presses for animators. That was the Megabyte ad where it was like, I want you to come and sit in the dark with me, or something like that. And we're going to make all this animation. And at the same time, we're making phone calls to people all across Canada and Vancouver. We had a set date at that point for these new guys to arrive, and we knew we'd have to be in a bigger office by that set date. And I remember talking to Spanky on the phone because he was getting ready to quit the job he was doing and fly to Vancouver and bring his wife.
I finished Sheridan College, computer animation, when I was 21. I started working immediately. I mean, there was 3D animating. I had done 3D already. But the stuff that we were doing then was mostly commercials. But I lucked out in that we got a job to work on the Beetlejuice cartoon. And that was insanely creative. Basically, anything went. I couldn't remember how I heard about ReBoot. It must have been in a trade magazine. They must have put an ad in. And I talked to Gavin Blair about 2 weeks after he arrived in Canada. So that would have been the summer of '93.
And he kept saying, bless him, he kept saying, and this is real, right? This isn't a joke, right? This is real. You've actually got these machines and you're actually doing this and you're really, really gonna do it. And we're like, yeah, honest.
Gavin was describing the show and what they wanted to do. It's like, are you for real? Really? They want to do this? Because I mean, who had heard of a CG TV show before?
And we're like, oh, we're in a hotel at the moment. It's like, you're in a hotel? And where will you be by the time I get there? Oh, by the time you get here, we'll be in an office. Really? Are you sure? And eventually he came. We were going to be doing an unprecedented amount of animation on top-end machines using top-end software. And a lot of them were just really excited to get stuck into that. I remember we did a thing in Vancouver at Robson Square called, I think it was called Talk of the Toon, where we did a panel and the audience was all people from the industry and animation students who were about to graduate.
Went to this little, to this film school in Vancouver that taught computer animation called DigiPen, which was a sort of a subsidiary of the Vancouver Film School. I graduated a year later from a program where the teachers were essentially the students who'd graduated 6 months before. Graduated in the spring of '93, and ReBoot came to town a couple months later.
So I went to Vancouver Film School in '92 to '93 for computer graphics, which was all new at the time. They didn't really teach us much. They said, here's some computers and some software. Do something.
When I started the course, so I took a 3D animation course. I didn't really know where I was going to go with it. I thought maybe I'd get into video games. That was kind of, I think, the plan in my head. And then about halfway through my course, there was this like seminar thing that was about voice acting and animation. And the hub, the original, Ian, Gav, Phil, I think Kelly was there, a few people were on this panel and talked about what they wanted to do with this animated series.
The people who were already in the animation industry, because they were all traditional animation people, and they were all like glowering at us, like, you're coming to take our jobs and you're going to put us out of work. And we were like selling this idea that, no, look, computer animation is just another pencil. And an animator uses a pencil, we use a computer. Same thing. We're not putting anybody out of work. In fact, we embrace our traditional animation brothers and sisters and want them to join us and have a go. You know, come and sit down and we'll show you how the system works and you'll have some fun with it. And we had a lot of traditional animation guys going, oh, I'd like to try that. And these young guys, I remember Zeke Norton and Ken Ball, I think, were sitting in the audience.
I think they showed Enzo with his yo-yo. There was like one shot, you know, of Enzo standing there doing a yo-yo to The Beat Goes On. And I was just in the audience, and I asked a question of them about it, and they were like, what they described sounded exactly like what I wanted to do.
And we were doing seeing what we're doing and what we're buying and things like that. And there was this weird guy with long, straight, lanky blonde hair, big, thick glasses. And he asked me what we were buying to do this on. And I went, we got 6 Onyxes, this many Indigos, this many Indies, da-da-da-da. And he went,
sign me up.
Zeke was there, where it was the famous, like, sign me up line. Sign me up for that.
Yeah, there was a famous line. Is that the sign me up line? Yeah.
Sign me up. Right, and we were like, oh, okay.
He's weird.
Yeah, he's weird.
But he's keen.
And then a few weeks later, I got an interview to go and talk to them.
And he basically turned up and said, I'm not leaving until I get an interview. So we gave him an interview.
I forgot that.
And we gave him a job. Because I didn't care if he could animate. He was just so great.
It wasn't so much about animation skills or what software I knew or anything. We just geeked out about the kind of stuff that we grew up on. It's all Star Wars, Spielberg, Sam Raimi, the Muppets.
And I had a VHS tape that I had done in school, and I'm like, can you please take my tape? And they took it, and that was kind of the thing. It's like, I got to get into this place.
The idea of what they were trying to do and what they were showing off and how they'd already gotten so far, just what they were proposing doing just seemed kind of mind-boggling.
Whatever I did in my course after that was to get into mainframe, which wasn't even called mainframe at that point. It was just to join this thing, whatever it was.
I think when I got there, we started doing all the initial walk cycles with the characters, just getting a feel for them, seeing how they look, how they move. We're all helping each other with software, obviously, because we're all learning Softimage. So as someone learns something, it's like, oh, check out what I did here. So it's like little tips and tricks sharing. It was always really good for that. Just being in close proximity of each other and just showing each other and helping each other do stuff. Especially when we're up against a gauntlet of, we have to make this first CG show ever, so we're just trying to get through it and help each other as best we can.
I remember sort of walking in and looking at this computer that I was assigned to and going, well, what do I do now? I don't even know where to start.
We knew we would expand into an office on a certain date with so many machines. Kelly was getting ready to plug them all up. The first office was just round the corner from the Lamplighter on just off Water Street in Gastown.
And literally ABC was coming up, let's say on a Monday. It was a Friday. From Friday to Monday, we not only painted the whole place, brought furniture in from all over houses, all right? Set up some computers that were running promos from Softimage and software companies because we didn't have a whole lot to show anybody. And it was a complete dog and pony show.
To begin with, we didn't have all the seats filled. So when there was a point where ABC came up for a look round, because now we had a real office, and we actually had people, they'd go into the first suite and, oh, what are you doing in here? Oh, you're animating something. Oh, that's nice, building a model. Oh, jolly good. And then they'd walk into the next room, and one of the guys from the first room would come out, take his hoodie off, and go into the third room. So that when they went into the third room, there were two people sitting in it.
I did come up with that. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's where my first impressions come from.
Basically, if we went into an animation suite here, we'd have one filmed here, and they'd go into this one, and these guys would do that.
And
take their hats off.
Yeah, so it looked like they had multiple teams, but there was only two teams going from room to room in front of us. Yeah. So that way it looked like there was more people than there really was. It was this big smoke screen.
We were employing anybody who could spell the word animation. It was just awful.
Yeah. I'd messed around a little bit with stuff, and they hired me as a PA, so it was basically I just learned at night. And I barely did. I was learning a bit. I could kind of move stuff around. And then they gave me a test. It was me and this other dude, and they sat us in a room with computers, and he gave me this thing. There was they had a ring on the screen, and I had to take a ball or a sphere or something and make it travel around, attach it to the ring or whatever. I had no idea how to do it. And the other guy had training, so he just did it in 5 seconds. So I just looked like I tried to do it, and then I made a little film, and then at the end I just flashed the word on the screen because I could make 3D letters really good. Because it was my thinking was well, I don't have nothing, and I would rather make him laugh to show that I'm clever. He's like, you better learn more shit, but you're funny. And I was like, I'm on it. So it bought me the extra 2 weeks that he needed to figure it out.
So it very quickly became apparent that I'm not a great character animator. So I ended up doing a lot of the sets, building models. In the Racing the Clock episode, I did all the racetrack stuff, except for the loop-de-loop, which was Phil Mitchell. I became one of the modelers until Gerald came along and just knocked us all out of the park. He just took everything to another level.
I pestered them for a long time, and then they said, stop calling. We'll call you. I was animating for an oil drilling company. And then halfway through it, I got a call saying, come in, come and talk to the hub. At this point, they were in Gastown, not too far from where Studio B was. And we were walking around and the hum of all the SGIs in there, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I was 24 years old, so it's like, it was a big deal. And of course, I got hired with no computer experience at all. So I got in there drawing, and then it would get handed off to other modelers. But because the doors never really closed and people would work crazy hours, I would stay there till 3 o'clock in the morning learning soft image. Before the first show started, I had taught myself enough to be able to model. So the first thing I modeled was the ABC, the Armored Binome Carrier. My drawings did not look like what I was building on the computer. And I remember Phil going, giving me a smirk, like, this isn't looking right. So I'm figuring, I must be doing this wrong. And it was all mushy. It didn't have the right shape to it. I was like, I gotta have hard edges on this thing. And that was it. Everything started to flow after that.
We found an office on Howe Street.
I think we paid $10,000 a month per floor, and that included power.
Oh yeah, that was a mistake.
While we were still at the Gastown office building models and hiring people and training people, Kelly started setting up the animation floor for the first season of ReBoot. And we had a full floor in the building, an animation floor with 6 main suites. And each suite would have an animator and an assistant in. They were really nice suites because Kelly wanted to do something different. So he built animation suites out of scaffolding poles and canvas. So they were like Bedouin tents, these animation suites, with giant slabs of wooden desks. So you've got your terminal sitting there, and then all this desk space. So animators being animators, they very quickly started getting personalized. You got action figures and toys and posters and stuff like this. And Kelly had to run the cables from one end to the other. And now normally you'd lift up the false ceiling and put the loop and then move down a few and pass it, roll it, go to lift the next bit. No, Kelly, quicker way of doing this. He got up in the false ceiling at one end with a crossbow and with a string tied to the bolt, fired the bolt down the length of the building to the other end, got down, ran down the other end, moved the tile, grabbed the bolt with the string, went back up there, tied the wire to it, pulled it. And that's how he pulled the wires in the ceiling with a crossbow. He was a bit of a Viking, was old Kelly.
Yes. That was a genius method. A little sketchy, but got the job done.
I had just finished a degree at SFU. I was working in the research lab there, actually, doing a computer graphics work there. So I was already interested in computer graphics. Silicon Graphics was the company that was the only company making these big computers that could do real-time 3D graphics at the time. It was brand new. The guy who serviced, Tony Shoemaker was his name, and he was the service guy for Silicon Graphics. Tony would come up and he would fix things when they were broken. And one time he was in and I was having a bad day and I was complaining about something and he said, "You should talk to these guys downtown." And he told me about these guys who landed in Vancouver and SGI had sold them a bunch of gear and they were gonna do a TV show or something. And he gave me the name of Kelly Daniels. He said, "Call Kelly." Yeah, he told me what they were doing and I had no idea about how to make a TV show with computers. I figured they did, but it sounded interesting and so I said I'd sign up. And so I went back and I quit my job, which was a decent job, and I showed up that day at 10 to 9, and the elevator doors opened, and there were no lights on in the place, and there was not a stick of furniture there, and I thought, oh, what have I done? So I thought I'd made a horrible mistake that first day, but it was just that nobody rolled in until 10:30, so that was just kind of the way they rolled. And I think the first week there, I saw Kelly walk by my office door with a crossbow.
Making the characters talk was the biggest hurdle. This is going to be a lot of lip sync. This is going to be a lot of dialogue, a lot of talking. How on earth are we going to channel it all through and make it work, and mechanizing that was essential.
We couldn't make it work. It would become very unreliable in terms of the end result, and each animator would have a different take on things. Even if we had like mouth shapes drawn out, it's like, match that mouth shape. The amount of time that took to do was just crazy.
They had bought a tool for doing facial animation, and they weren't happy with it. And they were just venting one day in Kelly's office, which was next to mine. And Ian said, you, can't you fix this? And I thought I could. I thought I'd looked at the way they were setting up the expression sheets for the characters. So each character would have a set of expressions built, and the idea was to animate the face by sort of mixing these expressions together. But the software they had bought to let them do that just didn't work very well for them. But I thought that I could do the same thing, and I thought we could tailor it so it was just specifically for these characters. The lip syncing package that we have is called Grin. I called it Grin because it was short and easy to remember, and you could make the characters grin with it.
And Grin was such a lovely little package that just anybody could do it. We had trainee animators in a day doing lip sync because the package was so simple to use and so powerful.
And the jaw movements will just emphasize his speaking. If we play that back.
After all the time, all the effort, all the lies, we finally have it. Gentlemen, meet the Medusa.
I loved Grin. You could just crank out so much so fast. That actually, to me, that saved the show.
We're inside the body, proceeding to nervous system central. On schedule, I might add.
It made doing lip sync so much easier than it was going to be.
Chris was a smart guy and would listen to feedback from animators, and that was the most important thing. And that's why that worked. When I went to Pixar's software was so rudimentary in terms of manipulation that I almost felt like it was a luxury. It was like, stepping back in time. So they were way ahead of the curve, and that's one of the only ways the show could get done.
The first time I met Chris, I think I came out of the office I was in. I was introduced to him as the person who made the strongest coffee on the planet, which was true. He did. He made amazingly strong coffee, which we needed. He was working on this Grin thing, and we'd, get these little previews of it. It was like, wow, that looks super cool. And my job when I was first put in with Phil was to do all the lip sync. I think the structure was the assistants do the Grin. Very quickly, he was like, I want to do the Grin too. Like, it's the soul of the animation, right? And so we would split up the work. And I was on cloud nine. Like I was getting to animate shots that the other assistants were not getting to animate because of how he and I would split up the work.
If you notice, a lot of characters wear shoulder pads. That was, stylistically a choice, but also a choice for necessity. The rigging at the time, even now, 30 years later, shoulder areas are notoriously, every project I'm working on, it's always a problem that needs a lot of fine tuning. We had to create sort of a ball joint. So we had like a separate arm, and we'd sort of plug in and hide the seam with shoulder pads. So there was things like that we'd have to sort of adjust to the designs based off of the limitations of the technology we had.
Maybe we had one act of show one done that was getting better, and we were dialing in the look and the technology. And I went down to LA. I'd go down to LA every couple of weeks to meet with the networks or, Limelight or such. And I went to Limelight, and their doors were padlocked. And there was a sheriff's notice, and they were shut down. So my business partners were not in business. When I finally got the sheriff to let us in to Limelight, the offices.
I don't know any of this.
Okay, well, they had this CFO named John somebody. Every drawer in his office and in Steve Barron's office was stuffed with unpaid invoices. Like
Jesus.
Millions of dollars of unpaid invoices. They hadn't paid a bill in months.
Are you sure you want this to come out on the telly?
Why? It's the history. It's what you had to deal with. I was dealing with lawyers, courts. I was flying around to New York, LA, all sorts of places, doing depositions, and really maintaining the fact that they had failed to pay us So I managed to put ourselves on as a creditor, which basically took the onus of him. They were trying to steal our company.
Limelight USA at one point held the underlying rights to the ReBoot concept. And Limelight USA went into receivership. So, from a business point of view, there were layers upon layers of trouble. And Alliance was there to bail them out. We had to help Limelight manage its receivership process so that the rights to ReBoot would not be sold by the receivers to pay Limelight's debts, and put Alliance in a very different position, both of ownership of distribution, but also basically guaranteeing to some of the broadcasters that the show would be delivered. Alliance started to basically pour money into Mainframe to rescue ReBoot. The company ended up putting in way more money than it had intended to. Some people lost their jobs.
Oh yes, that's the infamous demise of Limelight, and I remember having to borrow money from Phil to pay my rent.
They collapsed and they went away, and then it was like, hey, you may not get paid this week. And, we went a few weeks without being paid. So, there's a certain amount of faith there. Like, can we make this thing? Can we keep this thing going?
And I was paying people on the floor $100 bills out of my pocket. I mean, there was, for about 6-8 weeks, there was just no money, and people had to eat. And I would just go, how many kids do you have? And I would do the math. It was like that basic what was going on.
The fact that ReBoot got birthed at all is a miracle.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah.
It was a race to get it done. It was a massive undertaking.
I remember one time I was like staggering in, and my girlfriend was like, oh wait, she was like, this is the first time I've seen you awake in like 8 days.
I always tell the animators too, it's like, don't forget about audio. Audio is 50% of this thing. And so, you're kind of slugging through a show for X amount of weeks, months. It changes when you see it with the final audio.
Bob Buckley, who was who did all the music for ReBoot, he had set up a studio within Mainframe. Because when we first moved into the House Street office, there were lots of empty office space. And we just picked one of the big offices and said, Bob, this can be your studio if you like. And he's like, oh, yeah. So he set up and it was great for him because he got cheap studio space, and it was great for us because we had Bob right there on site, so we could go and bug him anytime we wanted anything.
I heard about this show that was being produced and that they were looking for a composer. They weren't looking in Vancouver, they were looking in LA, and they were looking in England. So I wasn't on their radar at all, but I heard about it. So I went into the office and I said, I'm a composer, can I submit something? And they said, sure. And I said, can I see some pictures? And I think they showed me some pictures of Megabyte and some early drawings of Enzo and Mainframe and some early drawings that they had. And that was about as much information as I got. So I went up to my studio and I started working on an orchestral score, like a action-adventure, Star Wars-ish, orchestral score. And I submitted it, and I got the job, mostly because all the submissions that they got from LA and England were all techno music. And they liked the idea of having the music be more grounded in the real world because the world was in a computer, but they wanted to have something that would give it the feeling of being a real world. And they thought what I did worked well for that. The opening theme needed to be done. That was one of the first things that needed to be done. The theme, I did use a live orchestra on the opening theme. When I did the theme, I still had my studio at home. I brought in a brass section and I brought in a string section to do the opening theme, and then the rest was all electronic. So do you want me to get technical and geeky about the opening theme? Everybody thinks that a major scale is the brightest thing in music, which is in C, it's... But in my opinion, there's one scale that's brighter than that. It's where you take the fourth note of the scale and you raise it up half a tone, so you get... And the reason it's brighter is because when you go, if I went... It's not very... It's not very good, right? But I do this. all of a sudden it sounds brighter. So the whole of the reboot thing is, and then it goes up a minor third. So the whole thing is constantly moving up keys as it's going. The piece never goes back to the original key once. It keeps moving through key centers and keeps evolving. So there's this feeling of the theme moving forward and moving forward and moving up all the time. And I knew that there was going to be some voice at the beginning, and I knew they were going to say reboot at the end, and that's as much as I knew.
To this place, mainframe. My format, Guardian.
I did write that, and I found some old papers, and I didn't remember till I saw the papers. There's like different versions. There's like one where Enzo's saying, "Oh, this cool guy Bob showed up," and I think that there was going to be like a live action opening, and it was going to like zoom in on the computer. I think that was like a ABC or a Limelight thing, and I'm guessing the hub was not real happy with that, which I think was a good call. But the one we ended up with, what I remember about it was that I'm a big fan of the original Star Trek series. That opening monologue is really cool. It kind of sets a pace, you know, and I thought that was fun to do there, so.
Their hopes and dreams, to defend them from their enemies.
I remember recording that clearly. It was a few days before the show was going to air, and they added it at the last minute. It was not planned in advance. I guess the network was like, we need to explain what's happening. It was kind of a Star Trek type thing. And I remember I did it kind of like Shatner, and I don't think they wanted that, because I could see that it was like space, the final frontier, you know, this kind of thing. So I think I did it a few times, and Chris Bruff was the producer, was directing me. And I remember I was upset about this girl I was dating at the time, and I was like, oh, I gotta pull myself through it. So we recorded that, like, you know, a few days before it aired on television. I don't think my voice has changed that much. I come from the net, through systems and cities and peoples. Maybe a little bit.
No one knows for sure, but I intend to find out.
We started using computers to cut and manipulate audio in 1987 with the forerunners. I think we're the second people in North America to have one of these machines. So when ReBoot was instituted, they looked at us and they looked at the other 2D stuff that we'd done and said, hey, we're doing this CG show. What do you think?
You get animatics, you're like, oh, okay, that's, you know, it's work in progress. But when the final pictures, you're like...
That never been seen before.
It was shocking. Yeah. We were like, okay, we got to step up our game.
Yeah, but when you first saw that crisp picture with all the detail, you're like, this deserves better sound.
And CG in general has that because it has a realism to it where in a 2D show, you may not, you go, oh, that's okay. We don't need to do the cloth movement, or we don't need to do the subtleties. But with CGI, you're like, oh, man.
Yeah, everything
okay,
is...
we got to spend some time on this.
Yeah.
And with ReBoot, with the schedule, you're like trying to crank it out. We had very little time.
You're creating sounds for stuff that's never... You're seeing stuff that doesn't exist, right, in the real world. Like, if you're doing real-world stuff, it's like, okay, everyone knows what that sounds like. You're getting animatics from them for stuff that's like...
Yeah, what is the game? What is the GameCube supposed to sound like?
Like
what? Yeah, what?
And it's taking place in a computer.
Yeah. Right. So on top of, like, it was layer upon layer of everything has to be designed from scratch. There's nothing. There's no like point of reference for this, right? It's completely different.
Oh, there's the zip board. Oh, Fong's kind of cool.
Fong is right.
Let me load Fong. His movement was made from 2 sounds. So a lot of servos. So servo was 1 sound. So I would take those 2 sounds and that, so we would tailor that to however, you know, extremely loud, but at the right level. That would be Fong's little ball and his movement.
Perhaps you will try later, my son.
You know, we watched that first episode fully mixed with final audio. It's different.
Warning, incoming game. Warning, incoming game.
You know, we're uploading images all day, every day, and just to see it mixed with music and sound effects, it just adds to it. And the energy's there, and people are just kind of like, oh my God, we did this?
It didn't feel like 9 months because you were very busy every day. You were building, you were designing, you were animating.
It just kept coming. I mean, I was rewatching the show, and just like the audio and the actors and like the editing, it's just like, I'm just getting hit. And I just, looking back on it, it's like, yeah, when you get that many people ganging up on the project, it has no chance but to at least be interesting.
I think we were so deeply embedded in getting the next episode done that we didn't really stop to catch our breath. But I remember it being kind of like, it just kind of going by and us just getting back to work.
The work was ridiculous especially on season 1. It was extremely hard, but everybody knew they were working on something special.
I remember coming over and Marcel showing me, it was just a 3-minute piece, and I was sitting there going, okay, this, yeah, I'd never seen it. Nobody had ever seen anything like it.
I remember seeing ReBoot for the first time, and it was at the GGRP studio. We were doing a session, and they said, do you all want to see this, finished episode? So I go in, and I had an imagination of what it would be, and then when I saw it, I was like, holy moly. Like, this is about 6 months to a year before Toy Story came out. So no one had ever seen anything like this. I was like, wow. I was like, this is crazy.
I scored the first show. I'd say 90% of the score was done to storyboards. I hadn't seen the animation. I really didn't see the final animation till close to the end of the first show. And I was blown away by it. I mean, it was incredible. I had no idea that that's what it was going to end up looking like. I kept on trying to imagine what it was going to look like, but it was just pencil drawings was all I had.
Finally, after a couple of years of just insane odds on all levels, it made the air. And I think at that moment when I sat around on a Wednesday night, Tuesday night, whenever the thing first aired on YTV, I went, thank God. And that was maybe my favorite moment. There were a lot of moments, but that was one. It was kind of, phew.
That's where YTV must be. That's where YTV had to be in order to survive, in order to create not only a destination, but a brand. ReBoot was the pony with a big heart that was going to drag mountains for us. And I could see that. You could see it. It was beautiful. It was stunning. It was colorful. I didn't care about the mechanics and the worry of how they made it. Just, I'd like some more pie, please. Just, yeah, I'd have another piece. Thank you very much. That was just pure visual joy.
We had 1 episode complete, and we were supposed to start running weekly in September, 1 month later. So I'm going like, where are we on all the rest of the episodes? And I'm thinking everything's up and running. And they said, oh, we got the next episode 2 done. We got about 5 or 10% of episode 2 done. That's great. And 3 and 4, oh, we haven't started those yet. I said, wait, how long did it take you to do number 1? And all I knew is I had this momentary panic attack having to tell my new boss that their highly anticipated computer animated show has 1 episode done, and I'm not even sure if we're gonna have a second.